Good evening and welcome to the Legal Roundtable. I'm Shaniqua Gray. Tonight I'm talking with A.P.Tureaud Jr., the first African American to attend Louisiana State University as an undergraduate student. He'll be talking about his experience as the first and then only African American undergraduate student at the institution. We'll also be talking about his father, A.P.Tureaud Sr., attorney and noted civil rights activist whose work, particularly in the area of desegregation of schools, led to his son's groundbreaking entry into LSU. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by Dr. Rachel Emanuel, co-author of the book, A More Noble Cause, a personal biography of A.P.Tureaud. She will join our discussion of the significant contributions of the civil rights activists that they recount in great detail in his biography. And it's all coming up tonight on the Legal Roundtable. Welcome back to the Legal Roundtable. I'm talking with A.P.Tureaud Jr., the first African American to attend Louisiana State University as an undergraduate student. In this segment, we're talking about some of the events that led to the groundbreaking entry into the institution, including the work of his father, civil rights activist A.P.Tureaud Sr., who worked decades fighting for equality in education for African Americans, particularly in the area of desegregation of schools at all levels. Welcome to the Legal Roundtable, Mr. Tureaud.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Now, I know that you were the first African American to attend LSU as an undergraduate, but I would like to begin by talking about some of the work of your father, A.P.Tureaud Sr., whose significant work in civil rights and including in the area of desegregation of schools really led to your entry into LSU. So could you talk a little bit about some of the significant work that he did in the area of civil rights and in particularly some of his most significant contributions?
In his more than 40 years as an attorney working with the NAACP and in private practice, Tureaud filed a number of lawsuits that significantly improved education, social, and economic conditions for blacks. Early in his career, he filed a number of lawsuits for teacher salary equalization that resulted in a set pay scale for all public school teachers in Louisiana. He also worked on jury exclusion cases for voting rights for blacks and desegregation of public accommodations and buses. A significant amount of his work was in the area of providing quality education for African Americans, early on for more schools and better facilities under Plessy versus Ferguson's separate but equal doctrine, and then later he filed a number of lawsuits to desegregate schools at all levels, including grade schools, vocational schools, and state colleges and universities. Tureaud filed the lawsuits that desegregated what are now known as the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, the University of Louisiana at Monroe, McNeese, Southeastern, Northwestern, Nicholls State University, and Louisiana State University's law school, medical school, graduate school, and undergraduate schools. The lawsuit against LSU's law school also resulted in the creation of Southern University Law Center. Still under Plessy versus Ferguson's separate but equal doctrine, Southern University Law Center was established in 1947 as a means to maintain segregation by establishing a separate law school for blacks to attend. Tureaud passed away in 1972 at the age of 72. Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American United States Supreme Court Justice, who'd worked closely with Tureaud throughout his career, delivered the eulogy. Tureaud has been recognized throughout the state of Louisiana for his significant contributions. He's the only African American for which a building is named on LSU's campus, and in 2014, his portrait will be placed at the Louisiana Supreme Court, the only one that is not of a current or former Louisiana Supreme Court justice.
Well, my father was a very prolific man in terms of his interest in a broad scope of segregation issues. One of the first significant cases that he worked on with Thurgood Marshall and the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP was equalization of teacher salaries, where in many of the southern states, black teachers were paid half or less than half that what white teachers were paid. So that was a round that was won very early in his career and helped to put a spotlight on him as a young black lawyer in Louisiana. You have to understand that in the South, particularly in the South, many young lawyers who were black could not make a living being black lawyers because they didn't have the respect of the courts, and the plaintiffs who were black didn't feel that they would get a fair shake with the black lawyer in a courtroom, so they didn't go to them. Also, many organizations like the NAACP, the state organizations or the local organizations, even though they had legal counsel from black lawyers, they would ask white lawyers to go into court to represent them because of the disrespect that was given in the courtrooms. So in addition to doing a lot of civil rights work, he had to gain a reputation to show his adversaries, to show the judges, and to show young black men and women that black lawyers could gain respect and be legal advocates because there was a lot of work to be done. He worked not only in education, he worked in public accommodations, he worked with people in terms of public transportation, and encouraged people at all levels to look at dismantling segregation in the South.
And you know, you make a good point. I recognize that he was a figure very early on in terms of African American attorneys, having been a licensed attorney in the 1920s and 1930s. You know, that was pretty early on in that area when there were only maybe just 3 or 4 lawyers at a time, and I understand that there were certain points when he was the only continuously practicing attorney in Louisiana. At the time this was going on, did you recognize the significance of his work?
I knew that what we were doing, what he was doing, with all of the people that he worked with, was very unique because we traveled throughout the country. And so many of his classmates from Howard University were doing the same things with the NAACP, not just in the South, because these problems in the 30s and 40s and 50s existed throughout the country.
Okay. Well, we're going to pick up more in just a moment. We'll take just a quick break and we'll pick up more, including your time that you spent at LSU. We'll be right back in just a moment with more from the Legal Roundtable. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Legal Roundtable. I'm continuing my discussion with A.P.Tureaud Jr., the first African American to attend Louisiana State University as an undergraduate student in 1953. And in this segment, we're talking about his experiences upon being admitted into the institution as the first and then only African American undergraduate student. So when we left off, we were talking about a lot of accomplishments of your father, A.P.Tureaud Sr. And part of that was helping you to get into LSU. And it was a time when people were not even attempting to be admitted into these schools, but there was obviously something about your upbringing that led you to know and believe that if you wanted to attend LSU, you could. How did you make a decision that you wanted to attend LSU?
Well, when I was a junior in high school, your guidance counselor starts you to thinking about where you want to go to school. So you start that process. And at that point, I confronted my father or discussed with him where he could afford to send me because there were 6 children. I had 1 sister at Xavier. And he said, you can go anywhere you want to go. We'll make it work. Now, my father was not rich. He was a lawyer, but he didn't make a lot of money. He wasn't interested in acquiring wealth. He went to Howard, and my mother went to Howard. So I had options, and we traveled all over the country. So I had seen other schools, black and white, whatever, northern schools. But there was something about LSU and going through the campus with him on our way to Southern, and he would always say, this is a marvelous, marvelous place. Now, I knew there were graduate students at LSU. He had won admission for in the law school and the nursing school and the education school. So I was not totally unfamiliar with that. But my father was a very easygoing guy, and I just had tremendous faith in whatever he said. And I said, well, can I go to LSU? He said, if you want to go, you can go. And when I told my guidance counselor that, he thought I was being a joking person that, you know, playing games, and he said, you can't go there, you can't do that. I didn't file an application anywhere but LSU. That's how much faith I had in him to do that. And I said, my dad said that I could go, and we go through the process and we'll file the application.
And obviously this came about as a result of filing a lawsuit. Did you have an occasion to attend any of the court proceedings, and what was that like for you?
Well, yeah, I attended, but it was very disturbing because I saw adults acting in a very mean-spirited way towards me, and calling names. And Leander Perez, who spoke more than anyone else, called me the most ungrateful Negro in the state of Louisiana, that I should go to Southern or Grambling. And I took offense to that. My father said I should have laughed at him because, you know, he was grandstanding. So, but those kinds of things when you're young, you don't absorb, you don't handle very well. I had to learn how to deal with that. But I never went back to any of the depositions. I didn't have to go, I didn't have to be there. So I thought, okay, why put myself through that?
When you finally made it to LSU in the fall of 1953, what were your experiences like?
Well, I came up here with a very excited attitude. I was looking forward to it. College was very important to me. My parents were both college graduates. It was a time that I was going to expand my horizons and learn a lot and decide what I wanted to do, because I did not know what I wanted to do. Although I did enter in a program that would lead to law school, but I told my dad I don't want to be a lawyer that I know of now, and he said, well, you'll change your major later, just get in. He had to find a program that Southern didn't have, and LSU had a combination undergraduate, graduate program. So whatever he said, I believed him, you know, and he took a very practical point of view. Make light of everything, don't get angry with people, blah, blah, blah. So I came up here expecting all of that to happen, and it was just the opposite. It was total shutdown, total isolation, total rejection from the adults as well as the students, and the constant harassment of trying to make me angry, to look for a way so they could put me out of school, and I wasn't getting the support I needed academically. So I was very unhappy. And I didn't know how to get out of it because I had become a symbol. And
so you recognized that you were this symbol, and that the responsibility that you had at that time to stay, but you wanted to leave.
Well, let's put it this way. I came expecting that after a few weeks, or 1 or 2, say 2 weeks or 3 weeks, things would begin to level off. People would approach me. Professors would be more reasonable and supportive, but the determination was very strong. And students, I understand, were told anybody that had anything to do with me would be socially isolated and blackballed.
I understand that there was an immense amount of media coverage, that there was a story every day and people were trying to get pictures of you. How was that like, being in the spotlight like that? I'll
tell you, it's very disturbing. Is very unsettling, and it made me more a target for a lot more hostility. And I was trying to blend in, you know, so I would say to the reporters, look, I want to be here, I want to be successful, I can't have you following me around, taking pictures. The Reveille also, which is the school paper, which came out every day, they did their fair share of every time I moved someplace or did something that no one else had done, like swimming in the pool, it became a media event. Or that people would send in letters to the editors about something stupid they wanted to do, like have a Roman holiday and put me in one end of the stadium and Mike in the other end and see who would win, Mike the Tiger or A.P.Tureaud, stuff like that. So that was quite disturbing. I was 17 years old.
Right. Now, from reading the book, and we'll be talking about this more in the next segment, but I understand that was a particular event that really, that you experienced, that really made you understand that you needed to stay and that people were looking at you and looking up to you. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a story that really was very touching and disturbing and wonderful and and upsetting all at the same time. I was sitting outside. I lived in the stadium, and the kids would bang on my walls all night to keep me up. I had roommates on both sides. Now, those rooms had 3 people in them, so they were 6, 3 and 3. I was the only one in a room for 3. And so I'd get up early in the morning, and I'd sit outside, and this pickup truck came. And I didn't know it was a black man, a white man, somebody was looking for me to do harm or whatever. But a black man got out and asked if I was AP, and I told him yes. And he went to get his son, who was an elementary age school boy, and said, I wanted him to meet you because I want him to know that this is possible for him. Mm-hmm. And that's a big statement, very touching. And I kind of chuckled and said to him, "You just ruined my day. I'm trying to get out of here." Mm-hmm. And I understand the significance. And it placed more responsibility, which created a conflict because I couldn't just leave on my own. My dad always told me, you came here on your own, you leave on your own. Now, I was not recruited by my father. My father never said, I want you to go to LSU. He said, you pick where you want to go.
That was your idea.
And this was my idea.
And it only lasted for 55 days, or about 55 days, right?
It was 55 days.
Okay,
right.
and as a result of a reversal of the court order.
Yeah. It was a preliminary injunction that was revoked, and it went into another trial through Judge Court.
And I understand that was welcome news for you. You were ready to go.
Yeah, because I was forced to leave by legal mandate, not because I couldn't take it any longer.
And how long was it before you returned to LSU after that?
Oh, my goodness. Not until 1988.
Mm-hmm. 35.
When we started, when Rachel Emanuel and many of her colleagues and classmates started the Black Alumni Chapter, mm-hmm. named it after my dad, and they
mm-hmm.
had the inauguration of that chapter and asked me to come down from the East Coast, from New York, and I'd never been back. I didn't ever want to come back. I mean, I've driven through the campus going to visit friends, but I never came back as an official person being recognized at LSU.
Okay, well, we're going to take another break, and we'll continue our discussion in just a moment. We'll be back in a moment with more from the Legal Roundtable. Stay with us.
Alexander Pierre A.P.Tureaud Jr. Louisiana State University is pleased and privileged to honor you for the important role you played in the history of LSU as the first African-American student to enroll as an undergraduate.
In 2011, A.P.Tureaud Jr. was awarded an honorary doctorate degree from LSU in recognition of his status as the institution's first African-American undergraduate student.
Welcome back to the Legal Roundtable. We've been talking with A.P.Tureaud Jr., the first African-American to enroll in LSU in 1953, pursuant to a preliminary injunction, but who only remained for 55 days when an appellate court ruled the case had to be retried. He was represented by his father, A.P.Tureaud Sr., an attorney and noted civil rights activist who filed the lawsuit that led to his son's entry into LSU. In this segment, we're joined by Dr. Rachel Emanuel, Director of Publications and Electronic Media at Southern University Law Center, the writer and producer of the documentary Journey for Justice, the A.P.Tureaud story, and co-author of the book A More Noble Cause, A.P.Tureaud and the Struggle for Civil Rights in Louisiana, a personal biography. The book recounts the life of A.P.Tureaud Sr. and his significant contributions in the area of civil rights in Louisiana. Welcome to the Legal Roundtable, Dr. Emanuel.
Thank you.
I read this book this weekend, and I finished it in just a couple of days because I really got into it, and I was sad that I had not read it earlier because I felt like I needed to know the information that was in this book and all these significant contributions. And I understand that this is a culmination of 20 years of research and that you've done this documentary and other writings as well. What is it that first interested you in taking an interest in A.P.Tureaud? So whenever you started all this long time ago?
Well, frankly, I tell people, have you ever had a story that you thought was so intriguing and information that was just so interesting that you wanted to tell everybody?
Mm-hmm.
it was that situation. I was working at LSU. We were doing the reunion for Black alumni, and they asked us to research the first graduate students, African American students that came to LSU. And there were people who did that. And then I was looking in the files of the public relations office where I worked and saw that A.P.Tureaud's name kept coming up as the person who represented all of these first students. And it just was intriguing, an intriguing story. And so I was in a master's program as well, and so I did my thesis on how he was covered by the Louisiana Weekly, the black paper in New Orleans, during the time that he was desegregating LSU. And it was a content analysis, so it gave me a lot of information. But I would like to say that this is a culmination of a lot of people's work, because in doing the research, I found that there was a graduate student, Barbara Worthy, who had done her dissertation on A.P.Tureaud. And then fortunately, he donated his papers to the Amistad Research Center. So there was a lot of information available on his work. And then he had also wanted to do his memoirs, and he had audio taped some interviews with another professor that I learned about when I was doing the documentary. So basically it was so much information, but it wasn't out there in a medium that could capture the public's attention, I thought. And of course, like my master's thesis professor said, you need to do something with this thesis. How many people go into libraries and read thesis and dissertations? So I applied for the grant to do the documentary, had more than information than I needed for an hour documentary. Then I went on to, I took that with me to my PhD program at UT Austin. And my dissertation committee said, after we went over that process of doing dissertations, that you need, when you go back to Baton Rouge, you take your dissertation to LSU Press to see if they would publish it. And it sort of started there, but it was a journey in itself after that.
Right, because, and I was going to ask you about some of the sources, but how, and you covered that, how did you all hook up in terms of writing this book from that point?
Well, when it was determined that they wanted to do a biography, and we had been showing the documentary and speaking to audiences, and then we just really, I was intrigued by his story. I mean, I was at LSU because he came to LSU. And so LSU Press asked me, how about asking A.P. Jr. to join with me? He had some stories that, from a personal point of view, that I would never get from, the documents that I never met Mr. Tureaud. Never met him.
And so when you were approached with this, I mean, I would think that you happily agreed.
Well, not really. I mean, I never wrote a book before. I'm professional. I've written journal articles and papers and things, but writing a book is a daunting experience. The other thing, too, is I didn't know a lot about my dad's personal background. I knew nothing about his ancestry. And Rachel knows more about all of the cases that he did, because I just didn't keep up with all. He was my dad. And so we had to build on what I knew and do research and then hire people to help us do the genealogy and to do the ancestry. While it's expanded the world that my family knows about themselves, and we found the plantation and the slave and where they came from and the Frenchman and all of that. So it's been a journey that I don't think anyone in my family has ever known, and I don't think my dad knew all of that.
Right, and I understand that at one point you said that when you got the book, at that time last week, you said it was like holding my parents close. This has been remarkable. So I imagine it was just amazing experience, just learning all of that about yourself and your family.
Yeah, and we talk about my dad, but my mom was as significant a person, although the book is not about her career. She was a civil rights activist, a professional woman, a pharmacist, and she, with many of her female colleagues, did many things in Louisiana that hopefully someday maybe we'll write about some of the things she's done.
Now, over the last couple of years since you all wrote the book, you all have traveled around the country promoting it and talking about it. How has that been received, Dr. Emanuel? How has this story been received? I know you want to get it out there. Now people are knowing about it, and just like my reaction, I'm sure other people have felt the same way.
Yes, it's really good to know that people take it as their story. It's so much in there that they may have experienced or know partial about, and then because it's written not like a legal scholar or a scholarly publication, they can pick up on the personal part of it. And that's why it was good to have AP involved in writing, because that's what we wanted. We wanted a publication, a book that would tell a story that anybody would understand and want to learn from.
And that's part of what made it interesting, because it was the personal life against his professional life, and that made it very easy to read, because it would be a point where it would be welcome to see what was going on at home while all this was going on.
Yes.
So I really enjoyed that, and I will put the information on the screen as to how people can order the book and the documentary and get more information. But I just want to ask you one more question, because we're just about out of time. Was there anything in particular that really stood out to you as you researched the family of A.P.Tureaud and, you know, his children and everything? Is there anything in particular that really stood out more than anything else that you learned?
His work was more than just desegregation, voter registration. It was so full and encompassing so much that would change the way African Americans could be treated in America. So I was intrigued that the strategies that he used and the different types of cases he built upon to bring us to this point. And that's what I like to talk to anyone about, and particularly young people, or anyone that's trying to change things now.
It is a wonderful story, and as you said that, you know, Mr. Tureaud, your experiences certainly add to it and bring that personal element, and I appreciate both of you all for telling this story. I wish we had more time, but people will just have to go and buy the book and find out and read it for themselves. So that's all we have time for on this edition of the Legal Roundtable. Join us each week for the Legal Roundtable right here. Until then, I'm Shaniqua Gray.